And then this in turn, what's the output of that? It isn't just data. It actually is new forms of connections. Now, of course, some of those connections are ideas. We do, of course, data, in a sense, is the creation of a new set of inputs into our ideas which allow us to make new conceptual connections. But from a phonetic perspective, it isn't just those ideational connections that matter. They're not the only things that we can say we have produced in our research, is my point. We have also actually produced forms of new connection amongst ourselves, but also with ourselves into the relevant communities with which we're working. And of course, hopefully, amongst themselves, in ways that actually have an active intervention in the problems that we're hoping to illuminate. So, an example which I'm not going to be able to go into, I'm afraid, but hopefully in the final paper it will give it some concrete illumination, illustration, is an ERC project that was led by Ulrich Beck. Unfortunately, because it's a senior researcher grant, it was in his name, and therefore it seems like that's that. But the idea here was to be looking at East Asian, European, cosmopolitized connections around problems of climate change. So I was due to be looking at Euro, in particular UK, Danish interventions on low-carbon cities in South China, and Anders was looking at international port city groups who are specifically set up to try and deal with the problems of rising sea levels. But I think that we talked ad infinitum, to be honest, about, well, what are we actually doing here? And I think the way that I, in the end, made sense of what we were doing is precisely of methods as interventions. So a program specifically of workshops for East Asian European discussion of cosmopolitization and cosmopolitan communities of global climate risk. An initial experiment, therefore, in public intellectual encounters for precisely the production, the cosmopolitan production of a cosmopolitanism that we are interested in doing. And with this initial focus, not for a second claiming to be exhausting the world, but as an initial experiment between Europe and East Asia, and also, importantly, in initial experiment within the social sciences, not bringing in those, as it were, outside. This in itself was a challenge and a very productive one. But also in terms of data interconnections, again, initial focus in the same places, but with empirical projects also illuminating a strategic landscape for those within diverse climate change case studies. Okay, so finally then, in terms of what does all this mean in terms of intersections of mobilities, the future of mobilities and intersections? If you go along with my argument that mobilities is focused on issues of complex system government, and again I'm stressing here that government is not the state, right? In a Foucauldian sense, we are all involved in forms of government of the complex systems that we see through the mobilities paradigm. Then we have frenetic experimental intervention in mobility systems regarding issues of system and personal self-government. Whether it's the system's self-government, and in a sense, in the end, resilience depends upon that. It is only when the system itself can govern itself appropriately that it has any chance of sustainability, or personal self-government, different forms of personal self-government against mobile inequalities. Whereas on the other hand, MC is focused very much on these issues of cosmopolitan global risk communities. It's a different emphasis, and it in turn comes out in terms of the difference, the focus on living together, on community, communality, commonality, commons, collectiveness, etc., conviviality. So one of them very much focused on as broad as possible sense of self-government, and the other one in terms of living with people who are different and will always be different, and we're not going to make them like ourselves, right? And then, secondly, then, just to finish off, is if we say that mobility starts from an ontology and leads to questions of political epistemology, the challenges, I think, are twofold. One is to not take the onto or the cosmopolitics for granted. You know, so, for instance, if you're looking at a bench, it's only understandable, right, or a fence, it's only understandable that you will look at what that is and what it presents to you and follow the line from there. That's the nature of you have to stand on something, as it were, in the course of your research. But the danger is to not take those onto or cosmopolitics for granted and to try and keep them open. And therefore, there's also the danger always to focus too much on the local. And while we are all, I'd say, meticulous in saying, well, we don't privilege mobility, it's very easy in terms of talking about the politics of mobility to find ourselves privileging the local, for instance, in a way that I think may be politically appealing as well, which actually makes it a bigger danger because it might not be, it might be missing a great big strategic landscape of cosmopolitization, for instance. And then on the flip side, if we say that MC starts from an ontologics, the challenges are, in fact, the opposite. It's not to leap too always prematurely, in fact, to some kind of emancipatory abstract synthesis. To say that, okay, well, now we have East Asians and Europeans talking together, we know what cosmopolitanism looks like, because, of course, that's still massively exclusive. And then, conversely, it's the danger is, in a sense, this is where I would put it, is to focus very much on the homes in the world, always to be looking at the cosmopolitized landscape, rather to the exclusion of looking at specific places, which of course are always also there. Okay. Thank you.